So thank you, everyone, for joining us here on Humanity Rising. It's always a pleasure grappling with these great issues. And now I'd like to welcome Bethany Zalent, who is a Jungian counselor, who has specialties in trauma recovery and various aspects of psychotherapy. She is Canadian. I got to know her recently, and then as soon as I discovered that she was a Jungian, I invited her on to Humanity Rising. So she's going to make a presentation, and then at the close of the presentation, I'll circle back and we'll have a dialogue about these very profoundly important matters. Bethany, welcome.
Thank you so much, Jim. I'm Bethany. I'm an internationally accredited spiritually integrative psychotherapist, and I love tongue twisters. I incorporate Jungian methodology into a healing method that I developed called the Spiral Self Method that integrates somatic, narrative, existential, and Jungian principles to reimagine the hero's journey through a trauma-informed lens. So I just put my links in the chat, and I'll just share my screen. So today we're going to be exploring the symbols of the self, healing through Jungian myth and meaning, how dreams, symbols, and images, myths, and archetypes support our journey of becoming more ourselves. We'll be exploring personal reflections, case studies, and popular culture. I want to start by sharing a nightmare that I had when I was a child. I was young. I was about 4 or maybe 5 years old here. It was one night, there was an intruder in the corner of my room. A sinister shadow looming, never moving. It was the fear that paralyzed me. As I drifted off to sleep, the shadow crept closer. I was pulled by my spine into my bed, through the floor below, beyond the layers of the earth, and into hell itself. I had been raised in the holy church pews. This is not where I was meant to be. I experienced the sticky tar of fear, whose eclipsing weight was equaled only to the haunting silence that emerged before, behind, and all around me. I was surrounded by the dead, taken already by a plague of repression. This dream would visit me every night for over 5 years, until one day it stopped. And I realized that the shadow that had been looming in the corner was nothing more than my mother's rosy pink bathrobe, the one that I used to dress up as a grown-up during the day. With the light on, the fear of the shadow was rendered trivial. Similarly, it is the fear of being ourselves that is often like the bathrobe on the back of the door. It feels so terrifying when the light is off, when we are disconnected from ourselves, when we are unknown to ourselves. But when we find the light switch, we can see there is nothing to be afraid of. It is only a bathrobe. For young, dreams are breadcrumbs from the unconscious, guiding the dreamer towards wholeness. Dreams are not random. They are a language of the soul, speaking in imagery and metaphor to illuminate the path of individuation. Each symbol, archetype, and emotion within a dream carries a message from the deeper self. It's part of ourselves that cannot be censored by our ego, but highlights the parts that want to be integrated. My dream was a breadcrumb from my unconscious, an early initiation into a lifelong journey to know, understand, and integrate my authentic self, including the fear. By exploring dream images with curiosity, we can uncover these unconscious patterns shaping our lives and move towards a more authentic existence. When we are utilizing a Jungian framework to understand ourselves, our clients, and the world around us, we are in the field of transformation. Transformation is the purpose, change is the path. And that might sound trite, but we resist change as humans. We don't like change. Change is the transformation. The intention in Jungian methodology is to become more ourselves. It is the ultimate, easier said than done. The guiding light of this in practice is reflected by a quote that's attributed to both Jung and Joseph Campbell. It is a privilege of a lifetime to be who you are, to slough off the shell of who we have been told to be and emerge as the self we were destined to be. This is the powerful process of individuation. But we cannot transform if we resist the unknown. It is the fear of the unknown that often keeps us stuck in the past versions of ourselves. The self we are waiting to become is the bathrobe on the back of the door. It looks terrifying in the dark, but it is a premonition of who we will become. We just need to turn the light on. Through his lifetime of work, Jung gifted us a language for the unspeakable, illuminating the unconscious through symbols, myths, and archetypes. It is through this language we are able to dialogue with our inner process, to build a bridge with our own psyche. Our psyche is constantly communicating with us through dreams, images, and embodied sensations, guiding us towards wholeness and individuation. Individuation happens when we discover our meaning and purpose in life, when we find ourselves, who we really are. The self starts to emerge in adolescence, but it's often dismissed as a phase or punished as a rebellion. By engaging with universal myth and symbolic language, we can reclaim these exiled parts of ourselves, bridging the divide between shadow and persona, conscious and unconscious, fear and authenticity. If you recognize this image, you may be a Hosier fan. This is from his 2019 album, Wasteland. And it's an interesting thing when we talk about universal language, because wasteland is exactly what Sharon Blackie describes her time being inauthentic in her book, If Women Rose Rooted. The wasteland is this very alive archetype that seeps through music, literature, and mythology. So symbolism is where we begin. Symbolism is how the unconscious speaks, revealing hidden truths through metaphor, imagery, and our body. Our job is to learn the language of our body. The body is the container for the unconscious. As another Canadian Jungian analyst, Marion Woodman, put it, we transcend through, not out of our bodies. It is our responsibility to interpret the message that our body shares with us. The less we listen to these messages, the louder they become. I had been seeing Jay for therapy because the whispers of her body had become screams. At first, her body whispered through unplaceable anxiety, a hollow yearning. Then it was sleepless nights and an inescapable crawl out of your skin feeling. Then it became a gnawing suicidal ideation, desperation to change anything in her life. She rearranged her house, dyed her hair, went out more and more and more, but there it remained, a haunting, deep dissatisfaction. But at what? Like Elizabeth Gilbert before her, Jay found herself on the bathroom floor, unable to will herself to move. In our session, I asked her a very simple question. Was it not easy, but it was a simple question. How does your body feel? She slowly, very slowly, described a sinking feeling in her stomach. It wasn't just a sinking feeling, though. It was a heavy weight causing her to sink. It was a stone, perfectly round and cold to the touch. It sat at the pit of her stomach, bending her at the center of herself. It felt as if its chains were endless and she would surely be dragged along with it. In Jay's words, it was as if this heavy, cold, metal, sinking stone was attached to the center of nothing, and if I don't listen to this, I will become nothing. Her body held the truth that her words concealed. This somatic feeling begins the symbolic language of metaphor as we create space for curiosity, as we take the wisdom of our body seriously. It is through this process of simply holding space that I discovered a universal thread of how trauma is experienced in the subconscious. The feeling of your body being dragged down by this unplaceable, haunting fear was something that I had felt before, something that I had seen mirrored in countless clients before. If we are to learn the language of the subconscious, we must be ready to learn. There's a German proverb that says, "No master craftsman ever fell from the sky," which is probably the most German proverb there is. Learning a language takes time, and learning the language of the subconscious requires us to spend time with it. The most effective way to become fluent is immersion. For this photo shoot that Angelina Jolie did, she didn't shower for 3 days so that she could use the pheromones of the bees and so that they wouldn't sting her. It was through the immersion that she had this experience with the bees. Very practically, that means immersing ourselves in our dream images, immersing ourselves in our body, listening to ourselves. Trauma often reveals itself in symbolic language because it is otherwise unspeakable. When we talk about healing, we are insinuating there has been an injury, but we often turn towards the healing before we have even listened to the injury. Knowing the injury allows us to access the most appropriate healing because the treatment for heartburn is different from the treatment for a heart attack, and it should be. This is why the body is such an important guide in our healing process. The sensation is the first symbol in the language we learn because it directs us to the injury. And from this symbolic language, we learn more about how we are shaped by our experiences. In my sessions with M, we kept returning to a specific stuck point. There were no words to describe her experiences. What happened to her was unspeakable. Since talk therapy can only process that which is expressible in language, we turned instead to the canvas. Sitting cross-legged from one another on the floor, she chose her favorite color, pink, the color of the heart chakra, which Jung studied extensively. With this color, M made her mark. Time stood still as she traveled back in time, retracing her life with each splatter and stroke. When she picked up the black paint, she paused. She dipped her brush in the paint, then into the nearby jar of water, and the water rippled in black shadows. Em moved so swiftly then, tracing her pain on the canvas as it poured from her hand. Each movement was so sure. She was making a map of her psyche, and the pain had finally found a voice. Em was soon finished with the black, but was not finished with her painting. With a new brush and fresh water, Em took again the color of her heart and painted herself over her pain. She knew when the painting was complete. Em sat back and touched the splatters of blackness with such tenderness. She traced her fingers along the pink edges. The healing happened between the brushstrokes on the canvas because her unconscious had been allowed to speak the unspeakable. In Jung's practice, he used mandalas to represent the wholeness of the self and the process of drawing mandalas to integrate psychological divisions. These are a traditionally Buddhist practice of mindfulness and intention, and once they are created, they are wiped away. It's a beautiful lesson in impermanence that we are always evolving, transforming, growing, shedding, sacrificing. Through these symbols in the circular experience of the mandala, we see symbols appear, disappear, and transform. We can make the unknown known. We can turn on the light. Through mythology, we can do the same. Myths are not just ancient stories. They are living blueprints for transformation that shape the meaning that we make in the world. It is through mythology that we can have a true experience. We are not alone in our struggles. We are walking the same path as our ancestors and can learn from the wisdom they've shared in the stories they've left behind. In mythology, we see a similar structure of what Joseph Campbell called the monomyth, or the hero's journey, marking the path of departure, descent, initiation, and return, mirroring our own psychological evolution. In this way, myths are a series of symbols depicting the process of individuation. Dee came to me in a white t-shirt and jeans. She told me of her younger self with such wistful remembrance, of how she used to wear colorful, flowing clothes, of how she used to write poetry and laugh and cry and be barefoot all the time. As she shared these talismans of her past selves, her arms folded, her gaze fell, her voice faded. When I asked what happened to that colorful, expressive self, Dee simultaneously shook out her arms and head and laughed. She grew up. The grief of losing this part of her is a story that's been told before, of how we lose ourselves to the expectations thrust upon us. One of these stories is the Selkie, a seal woman with the magic to transform between these shapes, to move between sea and land. She could sometimes be seen dancing under the moon on the shore, her skin like stars in the moonlight. One night, a fisherman sees her, and he is transfixed. He steals her seal skin to keep her from transforming back, for he had to have her. He folded her skin in squares, locking it in a wooden chest in his house high on the hill. She is compelled to be his wife, but she will not be happy. She cannot be happy because the skin of her true self is locked away beneath the key. She longs for the sea. And one day, through many trials, she finds her way back to the shore, slips into her skin, and once again is home in herself. The next question I asked Dee after exploring this myth together was, where is your skin? Which is probably a question that shouldn't be taken out of context. What that question is asking is, where is yourself? Where are you hiding? Dee didn't start her life by hiding. She learned she had to hide. She learned it wasn't safe or okay to be colorful or expressive or barefoot. She learned she had to be a good girl, wear shoes, not draw attention to herself. The attention she got was never good. Over time in our sessions, Dee transformed. She found her skin. She began wearing colorful scarves, opting often to be barefoot in session. In this process, she reclaimed this hidden part of herself, integrating her authenticity and trusting her instincts. It wasn't just her wardrobe that changed. Dee left her marriage and returned to herself, guided by the wisdom of the Selkie, the seal woman dancing on the shore in the moonlight. Healing through mythology isn't only listening to stories that have been told. We can create our own living mythology using archetypes. For Jung, mythology is the backdrop for archetypes. Archetypal energy is big and profound, and when we tap into its well, we are connecting with the collective unconscious. Celebrities often embody archetypes because they are larger than life, and so are archetypes. Robin Williams was a jester, an artist, an everyman, but he also had deeply personal experiences, often eclipsed by the grandeur of the archetypes that he embodied. In our own process, archetypes can reveal our alliances and patterns of overcompensation. In our healing process, we can learn to tap into archetypal energy with intention and listen to our own intuitive wisdom. C was born older than she was, parenting her parents who numbed too much, exploded too much, ignored her too much. She became the caregiver because she had no choice. She learned to anticipate the needs of anyone around her and do anything to meet the ever-changing needs. In trying to do anything, C ended up doing everything. Being in service to others too early, creating an alliance with a compensatory archetype. While the caregiver was busy, and she was busy, helping and serving others, the outlaw emerged. She is outspoken, brash, and refuses to step down. She does things others would regret. What others see as anger in her is a relentless need for justice. The outlaw is a protector, and who she protects is the innocent one. The archetypal energy that was never allowed to emerge, that never had space to emerge. It was never safe for her to be innocent. The caregiver had been born too early, a desperate attempt to create order in the chaos, and it had only been with the outlaw's protection that the innocence dared to begin to show her longing. But it wasn't long before the outlaw, while still outspoken, had to become responsible. And with the intensity that only accompanies archetypal energy, the reign of the ruler began. Unknown to C, the ruler marked the end of the caregiver. She couldn't be more relieved at first. The ruler was armed with a life plan spanning more decades than she had yet lived, obstinately ensuring her life would be about her after all these years of picking up after other people's chaos. But the ruler was strict and unyielding. He demanded more and more control, and in his rule, innocence was bound. Control came at a cost. All this time, the archetype waiting to be heard was the sage. She had the intuitive wisdom, repressed by the ruler, nurtured in the innocent, taken a little too far with the outlaw, and given away by the caregiver. Using archetypes as the landmarks through mythology, C developed a unique relationship with each of these archetypes, embodying her personal mythology through life. Mythology surrounds us. We surround ourselves with mythology. It's in our video games, our comics, our movies, in the never-ending Marvel sagas. The archetypes are speaking. When we can be curious about the stories and the symbols we are drawn to, and see if we can identify what is mirrored in ourselves through this story, we can tap into this archetypal energy, even for a moment, to propel us forward into the next chapter of our transformation. Through all of this, we have been talking about the parts of ourself that we have hidden away. The sage for C, the colorful expressive clothes for D. That which we have hidden away is precisely what becomes our shadow. The shadow represents all that we experience as unacceptable, because as Gabor Mate puts it, we are always choosing between attachment and authenticity. And we will always choose attachment until we can no longer not choose authenticity. Basically, we will always choose others until our psyche's drive towards wholeness forces us to choose ourselves. The personal and collective shadow is the fodder from shame. But it does depend on the person, their family, their age, the gender they were socialized by, and the generation they belong to. For some families, softness and vulnerability were not acceptable and became the shadow. For men, it's common for fear to take up space in the shadow, while anger is one of the only acceptable emotions on the surface. In my early experiences in the church, ambition was a trait reserved for men or for God. Personal ambition became tucked away. The collective shadow can mirror the personal, but it is what we as a culture reject. Anger, sex, suffering, vulnerability are all part of the collective shadow. The shadow is part of us. It is part of the self and must be expressed. It is compelled to be heard. The shadow will make itself known with intention, and if not, it will become feral. For Jung, the shadow was a repressed part of the unconscious, with most often the negative aspects of the person, the dark side. But the negative attributions of the shadow are because of the darkness, not an indication of darkness itself. If we turn on the light, what is perceived at first to be darkness, we can see that it is merely the bathrobe hanging on the back of the door. It is not an intruder if only we can find the light. In Star Wars, which is like quintessential hero's journey, we can see a very clear depiction of the shadow as Anakin transforms into Darth Vader, the dark side suffocating him from the inside. We could say that Anakin's shadow is evil and violent, but it isn't. Anakin's shadow is fear. He is afraid. He was conquered by grief when he lost his mother, and as his love for Padme grows, his fear of grief grows in stride. He cannot bear another loss. Anakin's shadow is power, but not greed of power as Palpatine's is, but from the fear of grief, robbing him once again of the love he so desires. Anakin could not bear to be made powerless in the face of love. If Anakin were to turn towards this fear, he would feel his capacity for love, and that grief is the good response to losing love. Of course it is. How can we love without an equal experience of loss? In Anakin's attempt to avoid grief, he is avoiding his own powerlessness, that he could not save his mother, and one day he will not be able to save Padme. And that's true. He cannot save them. He isn't supposed to. Neither do they ask him to. It is in his own duty to avoid pain that first creates the obsession with staving off grief. And in his vulnerability, Anakin is preyed upon by the dark side, promising power over death. But it is because of love, not evil, that Anakin first turns to the dark side. When the shadow is born, it is not alone. Another equal is created in its wake, the persona. Jung describes the persona as a mask, the forward-facing representative to both make an impression on the world while hiding the nature of the true self. The purpose of the persona is acceptance. In the same way that the shadow is disowned from fear, shame, and social conditioning, so too is the persona created by it. T told me that they often leave social gatherings with this itchy exhaustion. She was agitated for days afterwards, fatigued but unable to sleep. The mask that she wears when perceived by others, any other, is smothering to her. In some ways, the mask brings a relief because in the mask, she isn't perceived. At least her true self isn't perceived. And then she isn't judged. But in not being perceived, by covering her true self, she is also never really known. It is only her persona that is known. How excruciating to move through the world always being perceived and never being seen. The repression of the self takes energy. It is exhausting to always perform the persona, to forever keep the shadow at bay. We spend so much time, energy, and resources being someone or something else, carefully orchestrating how we are perceived. Much of the burnout we have from our daily toil is exacerbated by this existential exhaustion, the fatigue of repression bringing weight with every step we take. The tension between the shadow and the persona is personified in countless myths and stories throughout the ages. The modern retelling of Black Swan is basically just posh Fight Club. The tension between the innocent Odette and the outlaw Odile represent the inner conflict of the shadow and the persona, who we have been told we must be and who we long to become. In the cinematic retelling of the traditional ballet, Odile represents passion, energy, the ability to let go and express herself. Odette, on the other hand, is perfect. She executes her moves perfectly. Still, she is at first overlooked for the part because she is too buttoned up. She has too many inhibitions. She cannot let go. In shadow work, we're primarily working in the realm of shame, addressing how we've been told we're bad. And for Odette, being anything other than perfect is bad. Odette spends the entire movie running away from Odile, feeling relentlessly hounded by her. But Odile is not persecuting Odette. It is the persona's own fear of being overthrown by the shadow that keeps her running away. This is a spoiler, but this movie came out over a decade ago. In the end, Odette makes a grave error. In her unconscious attempt for supremacy in the psyche, she kills Odile with a shard of glass from the broken mirror. And then Odette dances with the fervor and confidence she has always longed for, until she realizes that it was herself that she stabbed. When the light turns on, she can see the shame scurry away like the cockroach that it is, experiencing for the first and the last time the power of expression that she could have danced with all this time. Odette's error was trying to kill the shadow. We cannot kill the shadow. We cannot domesticate it either, nor should we try. We should not even confront it or otherwise use force. When Odette tried to kill her shadow, it was her to breathe the last, because the shadow is part of us, and we cannot separate ourself from ourself. The shadow may be wild and feral, but it has gifts to offer. Odile was chasing Odette because Odette dropped her. When Odette learned to be perfect instead of being herself, Odile was born. Since we are always oriented towards wholeness, the pursuit of the shadow is not about erasing it, but integrating it, listening to it. We do not need to steal the skin of the seal or pierce the shadow with glass. Shadow work is not violent. It is tender. We gently turn towards the shadow with openness and curiosity, just as you would approach any wild thing. The fear we have of the self is only fear of the unknown. The shadow contains parts of you that are unknown, but we can get to know all of you. The shadow has just been hidden away when it became unsafe to be yourself. But you do not need to hide yourself anymore. We can turn the light on. We can see there is nothing to fear. You are nothing to fear. When addressing you as the self, I am not talking of a highest or even of a true self, because the self is not singular. The self is not fixed. It is always growing, evolving, and becoming. The authentic self is a crystal with many sides, each side with many facets. Our goal in individuation, in orienting towards wholeness, is not sameness. Living authentically is about developing an integrity, an alignment between our inner desires and our outer actions. In integrating the shadow and becoming authentic, life does not become easier. It's the same thing I tell clients who are getting sober. Life is not easier when you're sober. It is objectively way harder. You have to feel all of the things that you have always numbed yourself to, and you have to be present for them. But you will be present. You will be living. It's the same for authenticity. Life is harder. when you're authentic. It is. People in your life may not like your choices, but they will be your choices. Your relationships may change, but then they were only in relationship to your persona anyway. An authentic life is difficult, but it is life. So, to get into some practical bits, how do we become authentic? When Jung or Joseph Campbell, whoever it was, said, "It is a privilege of a lifetime to be who you are," it requires us to know who we are. We can learn who we are by learning our language of our body. Symbolic language is just like any other language. It takes time to learn. I cannot speak Mandarin. You can ask me to, but I can't. I wouldn't know where to begin. It's a very complex language. I've never learned, but we can learn language one step at a time. So we start learning a language by first learning the alphabet, and that's connecting to the sensations of our body. And then we start to learn basic vocabulary. Where's the toilet? That's starting to listen to our emotions. I'm feeling sadness. I feel rage. Then we start to integrate grammar. It's when we start to listen to our intuition. Maybe I'm not supposed to go there. I don't think I'm going to respond to that. And once we have mastered grammar, we can move into sentence structure. This is where we start to express our autonomy, making decisions. And in this process, we become fluent. One day, we become fluent. Just like when you're learning how to drive, you will be so aware of all of the gauges and dials on your dash until one day you aren't, and you're just driving. One day you will just trust yourself. But this requires listening. All of this requires listening. As Marion Woodman says, healing requires listening with the inner ear. Stop the incessant blather and really listen. There's nothing quite like being admonished by a Jungian analyst. Consider your relationship with your authentic self just like any other relationship. It requires time, effort, curiosity, and listening. Listen to the whispers of your body so your psyche doesn't have to yell. In remembering our goal is wholeness, the symbolic language we are learning is directional, supporting our decision-making in the micro and the macro. So in the pursuit of authenticity, of healing, we must expand our capacity to hold complexity. We are multifaceted beings asking complex questions, and complex questions deserve complex answers. Simple questions for complex questions are a lie. So sit with the complex questions. Do not rush towards an answer. Let the answer reveal itself to you. Transformation does not happen by force or by will. Transformation unfolds by listening. The question is if you are paying attention. In this process of transformation, we are not a conquest because wholeness is not an achievement. We are not a trophy to be put on a shelf. Instead, we are constantly getting deeper into the spiral of ourselves. We can come to the same view and say, oh, mother issues again, but we are at a deeper level. Yes, mother issues again. My dream of hell returned again and again until that part of my psyche was integrated. I carry it with me now. It is no longer separate from me. Jay took the sinking stone inside her and chiseled it into an effigy of her former self. She carries it with her. M proudly hangs the painting of her pain on her wall, a testament to the fires of transformation that she survived. D no longer has to hide. She laughs as brightly as her scars and walks confidently barefoot into the world. C tore off the blindfold she wore and listens to the sage wisdom within. She is learning to be tender with all parts of her. T is tentatively acquainting herself with the face beneath the mask. She is learning it is less lonely to be yourself, even if it means that you're alone more. Symbols and myths illuminate our path to wholeness. The work of wholeness is ongoing, but learning a language requires starting. When we learn the language of our psyche, we reclaim the privilege of being fully and unapologetically ourselves. May you turn towards your inner wisdom, embrace transformation, and trust in the unfolding journey of becoming yourself.